Margaret Thatcher are now David Cameron, and the likelihood is that would continue unless we go for independence. So the big win is we would get our government that we choose, which would then allow our government to choose priorities, to direct the way of life we want, whether we go to war, preferably I think likely not, whether we give tax cuts to the rich or look after the poor, we'd get our government.
You said something about military. Does that mean Scotland would definitely be able to maintain a military?
We would maintain a military. We would not be investing in weapons of mass destruction. We see no need for them. The world in which we live, the billions that are to be spent on Trident missiles are just absurd. We economically cannot afford them. Morally, they are repugnant because they're the end of humanity. And militarily, they're useless. We're not fighting the Soviet Union. What we're dealing with is terrorism and incidents around the world. You're not going to launch a nuclear strike on them. And we have a situation where the British Army sends soldiers, young men and women, into war in Afghanistan, ill-equipped, poor equipment, not properly resourced, and they die, and yet they invest in weapons that they're never going to use, submarines that have the capability of wiping out Russian cities or whatever else. It's pointless. So we would have our own army and defence force capable of doing what we require, participating in areas where the United Nations decide that people should go. The Irish Army, for example, for the Republic of Ireland, frequently serves in what would be described as combat zones, but where the United Nations thinks that there should be troops there, whether that's Haiti, whether it's areas in Africa, whether it's areas in the Balkans. Scotland would seek to do likewise. What we would not want to do is to take part in illegal wars, in particular in Iraq, that's, I think, made the world a worse place. So we would defend ourselves, defend our colleagues and allies in NATO, and take part in arrangements that the United Nations have decided is appropriate.
Thank you very much.
What would you say are the main causes of youth crime and why?
Main causes of youth crime, alcohol abuse. It's the main cause for all crime in Scotland. In the main, it's alcohol abuse. If I had, a penny for every time I meet people who do, whether it's silly things, sometimes just showing off, or whether it's more serious events, then, I would be very rich and Scotland would be a lot safer. So in the main, I think it's youngsters, for whatever reason, accessing cheap drink, but it's not just youngsters. Tonight in Edinburgh, see if people were to drink responsibly, then the police would have a remarkably quiet night. That's why the police say that the policeman's best friend is rain, because folk tend to stay in and not go out and do things. I've been in things like Polnick Young Offenders Institutes. I've met young guys, slightly older than the lads here, but then nice young guys who will say to me, and you look at them and you think, happy to go chat around them, they'll say, never ran my gang, never carried a knife. We went to a party one night in a small town, not in a bad area in Scotland, through the west, but a small town in Ayrshire. Argument started, drank too much, was in the kitchen, before he knows it, he's picked up a knife. His life's changed for a long, long time, forever, because jobs won't be available to him once he's released. He was not a bad kid. If he had his time back, he certainly wouldn't have used the knife. But if he had rolled it back and he hadn't drunk as much as he did in the manner. So I think for youth crime, as for all offences in Scotland, we get a more sensible relationship with alcohol than matter for drug. The other matter for youth crime is the devil finds time for hide with hands. If you hang around and you get bored and you're up to mischief, then you get encouraged to do things that you don't necessarily do. That's why you've sometimes got to judge who you pal around with. Equally, it's clearly shown statistically that if we put in five-a-side football, if we open up the gyms for basketball, if we provide dance, then the crime rate drops. So it's making sure that people don't abuse alcohol and giving youngsters something to do.
Do you believe the funding age should be lowered to 16, and if so, why?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're never going to have a thing where it's the same as 21 is the key to the door. There's always going to have to be some situations you probably wouldn't be ever, if you can afford it, able to get insurance on a high-powered vehicle till you're 25. It just won't happen. They won't insure you. We're not going to change the age for alcohol from 18 or the car from 17, but 16 is the age at which you can marry. It's the age at which you pay tax if you've left school and working. It's the age at which you can enjoy the army, even if you're not going to a combat zone. So I think 16 is the appropriate age in which to vote. That won't mean, as I say, you'll be able to drive at 16, and it won't mean you'll be able to insure a BMW if you're fortunate enough to be able to get one. but I think 16 is a more appropriate age than 18. Yeah.
What's your opinion on the revolving door crime?
It is the major issue. I mean, you're always going to have people who do one-off serious offences, and further through alcohol abuse, love, rage, anger. You're always going to have people who are career criminals, and they have to be addressed. But the revolving door tends not to be so much for the career criminals who view prison as a occupational hazard. It tends to be those who have problems in poor education, usually actually mental health problems, alcohol or drug addictions. So we have to tackle drug and alcohol issues. We also have to tackle mental health, and that's very difficult because quite often the mental health isn't something clearly, manifestly mentally ill in terms of schizophrenia or something where you could be dealt with by an injection or a tablet. It's what we call borderline personality disorder. They're strange to us, they're just alright, they're mentally ill, it's diagnosable, it's hard to diagnose, it's also hard to treat because there isn't usually an injection or a tablet. And that is the biggest problem. Usually what they need to do is to have some support, some element of barriers. Sometimes it does involve having psychiatric support. Equally, when I've been involved with people who work with them, sometimes as well as just setting parameters, because there is a danger sometimes that the personality disorder can become the crutch and excuse, which is, well, I do X, Y, Z because I've got this. Well, sorry, it's bang out of order. It's 3 in the morning. You don't play your music, have parties, go drinking, shout abuse at your neighbours. Even if you've got such and such, you just don't do it. So it's recognising the issues they have, working with them to support them. That, I think, ends the revolving door. There are other challenges to make sure that when people leave prison, that they've got a home to go to, that they've got friends to support them, and they've got some purpose in their life. If we can achieve that, then we'll end the revolving door. There are tragedies, people who leave prison on a Friday who won't be able to get social security benefits till next week. By the time next week comes, they've got involved in crime because they don't have any money. They don't have a home to go to, or their couch servants. So we've got to address those particular issues, that when people leave, they're able to be supported. And prisoners come in shape or forms, usually with great difficulties. I always remember meeting a guy called Harry, and I remember him telling me he had been convicted at 16, and he must have been for murder. He was released, but then he'd been in prison. He was slightly older than me. No, he was about my age. And I worked out that he had been in prison longer than my eldest son, who's 26. And he was explaining to me that he'd done 26 years in prison, not all of them because at one stretch, but because you're a life prisoner you get released, but if you commit an offence you get pulled back in. And Harry was telling me that he had problems when he got out because he didn't know, he'd gone out of prison at 16, and he'd obviously come from a very difficult background where parents were dysfunctional. He didn't know how to carry out a phone conversation. And we all start to say, that can't be right, how's that? But if you've never been told, you just pick up a phone and you go, well, you speak to the council to get a council house.